Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our live question and answer. My name is Lula DeFersha. I am the campaign director for Philadelphia Parks Alliance. And we have Alex. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there, everybody. Alex Doty. I'm the Executive Director of the Parks Alliance.
Welcome back. We're just waiting for more people to join us. Please feel free to tag people so they don't miss this live question and answer with our city council members. But like I mentioned, I'm Lula. We're super excited to have our live question and answers with our city council members. Last Wednesday, if you joined us, we had a discussion about the budget cuts and how social distancing would affect our Parks and Recreation with myself and Alex. We had a lot of amazing and great questions that we received through our comment section, through my phone number, which you see here. If you like to stay anonymous today, and if you have a question, please feel free to either comment in the comment section or feel free to text it to me, and I'll be able to ask those questions as well. So we thought it would be a great idea to keep this dialogue going, and we were so excited to have some of our city council members join us today to keep this conversation, get some answers for some of the questions that we had about the budget cuts. So we're super excited to have a full day of question and answers, discussions about parks and recreation, open space, and to really connect with some of our leaders today. What did you think about last week's question and answers, Alex?
Well, it was good to talk to people. It felt a little bit like getting out of the house, and excited for today. We had put this on our calendar during Love Your Park week. We wanted to have a Love Your Park Day of action, and originally that was going to be walking the halls of City Hall and talking to City Council, and so I appreciate the effort, particularly Lula and Steve, have put into figuring out how we do this virtually. So I'm looking forward to a day today where we've got this Q&A, and then we've got a Q&A with Catherine at Level at 2 o'clock. A couple of kids who are challenging some of our city council people to a game of Scrabble this afternoon. And then Lula, you're doing a read along with a rec leader today at 5. And then after a nice and busy day, we're going to do some Parks and Rec trivia tonight at 7.
Super packed day with some amazing activities that we have going on. Just housekeeping items, just in case for some reason, I know we're living in the virtual world, we get disconnected. We'll be back. We're going to try to figure out, so be patient with us. And if you just joined us, welcome. And we'll bring our city council members shortly. Just give us a few seconds. And if you, please feel free to tag people in the comment section so they could watch it with us as well. Some of the questions that we received last week, Alex, were just about the state of the parks and recreation centers, especially for the summer. And a lot of the questions were, are we going to have after school programs? What is it going to look like with the social distancing? People are just a bit concerned. So I'm excited to have this conversation with our city council members today.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. I think when we're talking about some of the logistics of how all of this works, hopefully we're going to get to have a more in-depth conversation with Catherine Ott Lovell, who is the Parks and Rec Commissioner, at 2 o'clock. But this is a very difficult time to try and balance a budget, and so asking city council people about what that process looks like and what our how you balance cuts have to be made. Where do those get made? I think that'll be an interesting conversation today.
Yeah, super excited. Should we bring our city council members up? And we have Steve in the background, our producer as well. Thank you, Steve. And we have our intern Jack and also our intern Sarah and Alexis. So shout out to you guys. Here we are. Oh. I think we're muted.
Hello.
There we are. Hello. Welcome, Council Member Jamie. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you for having me.
We're super excited to have you. And here we are, Councilmember Isaiah. We're super excited to have you too. I've been watching your live town hall sessions on your social media platform. They're super informative. Thank you so much for taking time to bring each other on each other's platform, but also other leaders within our community to have much needed discussion. And we're super grateful for you two. And we'll also have us, Councilmember Cindy, join us soon as well, hopefully. But we're super grateful for you two to join us and have this dialogue about the budget cut that I'm sure everyone has questions about.
Yeah. So I wanted to start just by saying, one of the reasons why we invited you guys on is because you guys care deeply about Parks and Rec. So just tell us a little bit about why, and maybe Jamie, you could start off.
Sure. I think our parks, our recreation centers, our libraries are critical community infrastructure. They're the places within our neighborhoods where people come together to connect, to recreate, to engage civically. A lot of times these are venues that host our civic association meetings and other civic events. So these are the places where people can come together and be with one another in an incredibly dense city. And I think these community spaces are critical to us having whole and healthy neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hello to my colleague. Good seeing you. I mean, I wore my shirt on purpose because every year I do my camp at Finley Recreation Center. I grew up in Parks and Recs in the city of Philadelphia. It helped raise me. It helped me become who I am. So to me, is entrenched in my DNA as it relates to the culture of Parks and Recs and the activities and things that go on, and just how much it means to the community and to the neighborhood that they're located in. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I am concerned because we are facing some huge cuts, but I'm here to do my best to try to advocate for those important resources that we need.
And have you seen any changes the way that people are using parks in the time of stay-at-home orders?
Well, yeah, I think the parks are like one of the last bastions for us being able to experience the outside world. And in the beginning, that was happening in some not always positive ways. I think people have taken a while to get used to the social distancing that we're supposed to be doing, even in our public spaces. But at this time, when being in an enclosed space can be very dangerous, it's even more critical that we have open spaces to go to.
I agree with Jamie 100%. I think that those spaces matter. They're very critical, especially at a time like this. I'm a father. I know Jamie's a mother. And when you just think about the fact that our children need that to release some of that kinesthetic energy, we need those spaces, and we need to be able to do it in a way that's safe where we can socially distance. So in the past, they were important, but they're even more vital now. And it's imperative that we maintain and keep those important resources.
I agree. And this virus is not going away anytime soon, right? We're still on the road to finding a vaccine. We're still on the road to broader testing and contact tracing. So it's going to be very important that we have outside spaces that we can experience in a safe way. So I see parks as being critical now through the shutdown, but also, down the line as well as we continue to move through and hopefully get over this crisis.
So you've both been involved in partnerships with Parks and Rec. Mm-hmm. That's really one of the crucial ways that our Parks and Rec system works. Mm-hmm. And so, what's the value of those partnerships? Jamie, you were with Fairmount Park Conservancy. What did you learn during your time there?
Yeah, so I had the wonderful pleasure of leading the Fairmount Park Conservancy for 2 years. The Fairmount Park Conservancy works really closely with Parks and Recreation to raise money for parks, to carry out park improvements, and to facilitate volunteerism throughout our park system. And what I learned was, one, how much people love and take ownership of their parks within our neighborhoods. But secondly, I learned that our system is only successful because of the dedicated and committed volunteers that help to keep up our parks across the system, including the over 100 volunteer park friends groups who work day in and day out to keep parks cleaned and to program them for their neighbors.
And Isaiah, you've been involved more on the sports side of things. What does that partnership look like?
So I think is multiple things. I think first and foremost, Jamie talked about it with the ownership, right? If you're from Philadelphia, right, and you play sports, you have your own park, your own rec center, your own playground. That was your go-to space for you, and so that ownership matters, and it's a Philadelphia thing, and I think it's important. We have a lot of pride in that. Outside of that, I've coached high school basketball for 11 years now. Actually, I'm still the president of the Coaches Association for the Public League for Boys Basketball. And a number of different teams that's a part of our league play their games in rec centers. So rec centers are crucial for us to essentially operate as it relates to high school basketball for the Public League. Outside of that, in the summer, as well as softball and other sports too. But I've coached softball as well. And it would be impossible to have baseball and softball sports in a public league without our parks and recs, because the majority of our schools do not own the space that's required to essentially participate in games. So that partnership has gone on for some time now. And in a former lifetime, I was an athletic director as well too. And I can attest that mattered a great deal for us to be able to function and provide that quality experience for the children who go to our schools. Outside of that, I do a lot of volunteer-based initiatives and programs, and I'm in that world where a lot of other people do. And I talked about my camp. That's just one example of things that without rec centers, people would not be able to provide those programs or services. And these programs and services are key. They're important when you look at the culture of our city, as well as the fact that these programs fill a lot of voids that often exists in different families and in neighborhoods and communities across the city of Philadelphia. So those partnerships, they matter a lot. They taught me how valuable parks and recs are. And of course, last but not least, throughout all that experience, it put me in the position to be able to meet some great people. And I've been on the ground working in rec centers for years, and I've had way more positive experiences with people who run rec centers, people who open, close, clean, maintain those rec centers, way more positive experiences than I've had negative. The majority of those folks that I've dealt with, they go over and beyond the call of duty. They begin to develop the identity of the community, and they give their all, at least for the time that they're at that rec center, to be able to help those people who rely on it, similar to what Councilmember Gauthier talked about. So I can go on and on and on, because again, it's entrenched in my culture and so many things that I've done. But our parks and rec centers are extremely valuable, and they matter a great deal.
So I guess we're all concerned that for 2 months, this hasn't been happening. And for some kids, this is one of the most important activities that they engage in. So I'm not sure that that's a question necessarily, but it's a thing that we're all missing in one way or another. But it seems like I guess one of the questions that I have is, or one of the concerns that I have is that the communities that are most reliant on Parks and Rec programming are the ones that are most impacted by COVID-19. When you're talking about African American community and low-income communities, that these budget cuts have the most impact on the communities that are being most impacted by COVID-19. Is that? I guess I already made the statement, but is that a concern you share?
It's incredibly concerning. And at this point, we're still waiting on detail from Parks and Rec that will help us to understand the nature of the cuts more fully. We do know that they've been asked to cut their budget by 20%. And that's hard to imagine given that we were already severely underfunded as compared to similarly sized cities with similarly sized parks and recreation systems. And so I think we have to be careful as we're going through this budget process to not make cuts that will impact our communities negatively over the long term. And I agree with you, Alex. Our neighborhoods really need their rec centers. They really need their parks and their libraries in order to function and to have a great quality of life. And so I think we have to be careful in this conversation to not lean towards austerity just because we're in this moment. And I hope to be able to make that argument.
I think a lot of neighborhoods that you're referring to already had lack of quality resources. And we can talk about the food deserts that exist in the city. We can talk about a number of other things as far as libraries. But rec centers are a great example of something that we already did not have enough of. If you look at what we were doing and what the plan was as it relates to rebuild and the goal to not just modernize current rec centers, but ensuring that young people all across the city, no matter what zip code they lived in, have access to that quality experience. So before coronavirus, we knew that there weren't enough rec centers and programs and opportunities, especially for our children, in every zip code. So I think that where we are now, especially when you consider who's getting hit the hardest, who was suffering the most prior to this, who's suffering the most during this unfortunate crisis, the last thing that we need to do is to take resources away from that demographic and ask that demographic to give more. So I think you make a valid point. I couldn't be happier to be on council with people who actually agree with that ideology. So when including, of course, Councilmember Gauthier. So when we're at the table and we're just 1 or 2 of 17 and we're fighting this good fight, we're putting ourselves in a position where we're saying we're speaking for those who under other circumstances could or could not have a voice. I am concerned. I don't want to see these type of cuts. I have been talking about not cutting and finding innovative ways to generate revenue for the city without increasing taxes or cutting and firing people.
Yeah, so welcome to your first budget, right? I mean, we didn't decide to start you with an easy one. So I know that you guys, this is your first year on city council, but what is this is unprecedented territory for the city. I mean, these are not cuts like what we had in the Great Recession, which were painful, right? These are 5 or 6 times, these deficits are 5 or 6 times larger than that. So, and you've now got 6 weeks instead of 3 months to be able to try and make these decisions. So what do you guys understand about that process? How is city council going about this budget process this year?
Well, we know that Parks and Rec will have its hearing with City Council on May 26th at 9:30 a.m. For my part, I'm going to be trying to meet with the department ahead of that date just to get a better perspective on the budget cuts or the proposed budget cuts, and so that I can be an impactful advocate. But I also think these forums are very important. I think council members need to know how much our park and recreation system means to people in communities. There's a lot of advocacy happening right now around various aspects of the budget cuts. And, you know, the energetic community of volunteers and community members that we have that love parks and recreation centers and libraries need to speak up at this time and make their voices heard, so that council members are able to effectively advocate. I also think that, you know, we should not let our federal government off of the hook for supporting cities during this time. We should not, shoulder the responsibility for the devastation caused by this crisis alone. So I also think we need to be advocating at the federal level for the things that we need in our neighborhoods.
So I think first of all, I agree with Councilmember Gauthier. She's spot on. Outside of that, I think that it's important that not only is the advocacy there as it relates to the budget for parks and recs, but for me, and I think that some of my freshman colleagues would agree, when we transitioned into council, we knew we were stepping into budget season. So while this does kind of minimize the amount of time that we have, I personally, and my team and I, we don't feel like we're unprepared. We feel like the process is forcing us to be innovative in how we inquire and how we advocate. I think that transition has been one that is different, but we're going to find ways and do our best to be most effective and make sure our voices heard as well too. And so I don't worry too much about the budget process in the sense of our ability to advocate and to understand what's going on. I worry about it more or less in the fact that the platforms have been recreated and how that advocacy essentially goes will be different. And so it's been an amazing first couple months being sworn in, but at the same time, I do think, I know me personally, I have a great support system, not just in my staff, but in first and foremost, my freshman colleagues. I can text them, call them, spend time on a call with them, ping-ponging ideas, brainstorming what they're working on. And I think that part is underrated. Jamie, Councilmember Gauthier, does a great work as it relates to housing advocacy. 85% of the things she comes up with, I agree. I don't know we even know what the I don't agree with it.
I start asking questions now. Yeah.
But if I know that she's working on housing stuff, right, and our office and our staff, they already have a great relationship. There's no reason for me to overlap her work or to reinvent the wheel. So I think one of the underrated things that happens, and I don't know if it happens in all legislative bodies, but I know it's fortunate enough to be one of the things that I rely on, is the fact that I can lean on my colleagues to know that they feel the same way I feel about an issue, but also be able to rely on them to run point and take lead on that issue, so we don't put ourselves in a position where we're spreading ourselves too thin. I think that matters a lot. I think the fact that we've been able to transition and develop not just a great bond with each other, but other quality relationships with other members of council, it puts us in a position where we can be as resourceful as possible throughout this process, so we can be just as effective as anybody else that's a part of the legislative body.
Absolutely. And Isaiah's right in that I talk about housing a lot, because I think first and foremost, you have to have a roof over your head in order to build a quality life, and to build from there. I think that's the foundation. But as it relates to this budget, I'm thinking of housing as a key priority, and I'm thinking of all of the things that make healthy neighborhoods. And in my mind, that includes our community hubs like parks and recreation centers and libraries. That includes the arts. And so I'm going to be fighting for the things that I think create a healthy community during this budget process. So I just want to be clear about that.
I think one of the things that I didn't, we'll bring in Lula in a minute to start getting some questions that we have from our audience here. But I'll share that before I came to the Parks Alliance, a piece that I didn't appreciate about Parks and Rec is how much work and what an important role they have for feeding our children and taking that over the summer, and that essential service, has only become more important at this time. And I know that that's one of the points of conversation we have with Catherine too, about how that work continues. But boy, it's essential service right now.
Yeah, the parks Commissioner Outlevel and her staff, they've been, some of the biggest heroes through this crisis. So I want to commend them on their work, particularly with keeping our kids and our community members fed. That's really important.
So Lula, do we have some questions from our commenters?
We actually have a lot of praise that's happening for our council members for saying thank you for all the work that you are doing. I agree. We do have about 2-3 questions, if you don't mind me asking. The first one says, what is council doing to find more funding for our parks and schools?
Well, right now, we're very early into the budget process. So I am looking at what's been submitted to us. I'm awaiting more budget detail next week. And I want to take a look at, what things are we proposing to fund and what things are we proposing to cut? And is the appropriate balance there, right? I think we need to look within the budget proposal to see what we can move around to make sure that our residents and people in communities have the things that they need, including parks and rec centers and libraries.
Thank you.
So on the park side, I don't know if we'll be able to generate new revenue for parks and recs in this cycle. My goal would be to try to maintain and to try to not see any cuts as it relates to the parks and recs. As it relates to our schools, I have a number of different initiatives that I actually released yesterday, and other plans that I have to essentially advocate for more dollars for our schools. So please be on the lookout for the legislation that'll be coming out from my office, because we're asking for a number of different initiatives, including extending bar hours and advocacy from the state as well as the federal government, to essentially deal with a lot of the fiscal issues that our schools are facing. And it's not just from an operator perspective, it's also from an infrastructure perspective as well too. So I do think that there are some things we could do locally to help some of the operational deficits that we'll face. But I do think that we should really put pressure on the state as well as the federal government to address the infrastructure issues that our schools are having, because that is essentially unconstitutional, the issues that we're facing right now.
And as it relates, also, I just wanted to chime in on schools. As it relates to schools, part of what I ran on that I want to bring to life is getting more investment into our schools from the big institutions that exist within our city. So particularly in the third, we have world-class institutions of higher learning here, and we have a lot of knowledge and resources that exist. And I think we can do a much better job of wrapping our arms around not just, a couple of select schools, but in many, many more of them, because I think that's what our kids deserve. So I'm going to be fighting for more support from the institutions in my district towards the all 35 neighborhood public schools that exist here.
Thank you. And we also have a question saying, do we know if the city has an alternate plan to feed our kids this summer if PPR rec center funding makes it impossible?
I can't speak to that directly at this point. It's something that we certainly have to figure out. We can't let our kids go hungry. We've been working very well. My office has, and I'm sure other council members as well, with Deputy Mayor Cynthia Figueroa, who's done an amazing job helping to set up feeding sites throughout this crisis. And I'm sure that the deputy mayor would agree that we can't drop the ball on that for the summer. So I look forward to continuing that work.
Do you have any advice for us about advocating so there needs to be federal money?
Right.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about what actions we might take around that?
I think it could consist of letter writing, social media, picking up the phone to call our representatives. And I think that needs to happen at the local, state, and federal level. We need to make our voices loud and heard on making sure that we continue to have the Parks and Rec system that we need in the city for people, and to keep our neighborhoods safe, because this is also a conversation that connects to public safety in our communities.
I think that the advocacy is 100% what's needed. I think that there also, in that advocacy on the state and federal level is important, but I think there also needs to be more dialogue around no cuts from the municipal level as well too. I think that it's important to advocate for more resources, and I think it's important to have the right people in place who understands the different resources that's coming down from the federal level that will trickle to the state and to local counties. But I think for us, the thing that we can control and the thing that is imperative to the constituents in our city, whether we're talking about quality programming or similar to what Councilmember Gauthier said, public safety issues. It's imperative that we do not cut the funding in the budget right now to our parks and rec centers. It's important that we maintain those resources, maintain those spaces, and become innovative in what the new norm looks like. I think when people are paranoid and looking over their shoulder and they're worried about whether or not they'll have a job, it's difficult to simultaneously ask them to brainstorm what adaptation looks like. And I think right now, our focus should not be figuring out who stays and who goes. Our focus should be, how do we keep everybody? And in the midst of keeping everybody, what do these new roles look like in the midst of parks and recs with social distancing, right? So we know that there are a ton of young people in the city of Philadelphia right now who are itching to get out the house, who need something to do, who feel like they might be, well, of course, us adults, but between them and us, a lot of them feel like they're immune. Whereas though we know this is no joke. So at the end of the day, we have to be thinking about the fact that they're more likely to not practice social distancing, and the people who operate and own those spaces, what does that look like for them? Imagine open up a park or a rec center, right? And you only have 2 staff members there, and you get 100 kids that show up that day. Well, there was no training that took place between what we were discussing during coronavirus to the time that moment hit itself. How do we expect that staff member or 2 to respond to that? What will be in place to address those issues? So I think the conversation needs to shift for us on a local level to do we maintain what we have, but will we need to reassign maybe other city officials to be staffed in our parks and rec centers to assure that we're implementing some level of social distancing? I know other cities are looking at the concept of hiring social distance ambassadors so that police officers aren't the ones forced to enforce social distancing. So it's a lot of dynamics that we need to be actively brainstorming. And I think it's very difficult to ask people to do that while they're simultaneously looking over their shoulder, wondering whether or not they'll be able to provide a quality living for themselves and their family.
Yeah, we had 14 Parks and Rec staff assaulted on the job last year. So that sense of safety is very, very real. So, Councilwoman, I know that you need to go to another event. And one of the things that I was hoping we could get you to answer just before you go is so we want to reach out to council people. If we're just going to do a 30-second advocacy 101, what works? What's the best way to try and reach out to your city council person? What do you think?
The best way is to reach out to if you're a constituent of a council person, reach out to them and let them know how the Parks and Recreation Center, Parks and Recreation system affects you personally, what it means to you as a resident, and ask that these cuts not take that away. I think that's the most effective way to reach out, particularly to district council people.
Thank you very much for your time. If there's anything else that you'd like to just share with us at the end before you go?
I want to just thank you for your partnership. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this platform today. And I want you and, all of the folks who are watching out there who love our parks and our recreation centers and libraries to know that I'm on your side. And I'm going to do all that I can in my position on council to make sure that we maintain these important community hubs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
So, Council, maybe the same question for you, which is, what do you think is an effective way for people to advocate? You are rather than a district councilperson, you're at large.
Sure.
What are the kinds of things that are an effective way to try and to be advocates?
I think it depends on what your objective, what your goal is. So for me, I try my best to be as accessible as possible, myself and my staff. So for us, we, if you ask, we'll try to have a conversation with you. If it's not me, it'll be somebody else. We understand the importance of the various city agencies and the essential work that's done by city employees to ensure that our city can function. So on a certain level, of course, that has to take precedent, especially at a time like this, when you look at what they're doing along with healthcare workers and SEPTA workers and so many other brave people who, go out there and do their job on a consistent basis with no hesitation. So on a certain level, there are going to be demographics that you just automatically feel for because you know that they're literally putting their lives on the line for you. Outside of that, in our office, we try our best to brainstorm the demographic of the people who are suffering the most and what can we do to try to provide some resources or offer some level of support for whatever it is that they're facing as it relates to an issue. There are organizations who do a lot of advocating, and they will email you consistently, and that does happen, and that is a part of the job. I don't know if I will call it effective, but I will say that it does get people's attention when you do flood the email thread. It is a tactic that people use when you do flood the phone lines. It's a tactic that people use, but I feel like that's not the best method because it doesn't encourage a conversation. It actually encourages you to not interact because you can't essentially disseminate what is spam and what is a legit constituent with a concern. And when you think about the type of catastrophe that we're facing right now, imagine spending your tax dollars and resources on a staff member to essentially go through emails, hundreds of them sometimes, and decide, this is legit, this is not. When at the same time, that same staff member can be brainstorming, how do we generate new revenue for the city without increasing taxes? Or they can be looking through different regulations that come down from the federal government to try to disseminate what we're eligible to apply for and what we aren't. So at the end of the day, I only have about 6-7 staff members, a few interns, and myself, and we're only but so many people. So I would not recommend trying to overwhelm us because that will not put us in a position to more effectively do our job. A lot of my colleagues on council, if you reach out and you don't get a reply, reach out again. And for the most part, people will give you an opportunity to have a conversation. And, I got a big heart. If nobody does and you give me a sob story, I will. So at the end of the day, I think advocacy starts with asking, and asking sometimes is much simpler than what people think. We want to hear your problems. We want to know what's going on. And I'm 100% sure that I am not the only person, especially on the city council that I serve on right now, that feels that way.
So what I hear you saying, Sam, is that the story, the authenticity, coming with the thing that you have to say is more important than having the right talking points or having the email blast system set up, right? It's about that reaching out and talking about what you're passionate about.
It's about talking about what you're passionate about, and then also talking about how that has an impact on the collective, right? Because you can be passionate about something and you could, do all the advocacy that you want. If it's not something that, especially at a time like this, if it's not for the greater good of the collective, like our parks and recs, it's very difficult for us to say that we have to prioritize this over something else that is for the greater good of the collective. So again, there are various forms of advocacy. I would not encourage or demean any method that folks feel like they need to exercise to get their opinion heard. But as far as being effective right now during this time, we're looking for the people who are suffering the most. I think we have to start there and then work our way up the ladder to the point where as though we're trying our best to accommodate all Philadelphians. And when you're talking about people who suffer the most, I mean, who's right there on the ground with them? There are a lot of people who are, but we know that the people who work in our parks and rec centers are.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Sure.
Any closing thoughts that you'd like to give?
Well, like you said in the beginning, I try to go live every Monday just to give a coronavirus update and to talk about the issues that we're facing as a municipality. Clearly, with us entering budget season, that process is going to be much more in depth as it relates to things that people are going to want to talk about. But I'm 100% open to the conversation. I try my best to be honest and let people know exactly where I stand on a particular issue. And the more information that we can have as members of City Council, hearing from average everyday Philadelphians as it relates to not just issues that people have, but concerns that people have, ideas that people have, resources that people have. We're 100% open to that conversation. We want to hear that feedback. We want to be involved in that dialogue, and we need your ideas and we need your resources. We don't have all the answers. So by any means, just like everybody else, this is something that we've never gone through before. So the more ideas, the more resources, the more conversation we can have, the better off we'll all be. This is a time that requires unity. At the end of the day, right now, we need your enemy to not be your enemy. We need your friend to be a better friend. And we need you to make sure you're checking on your loved ones and making sure that the mental health side is something that we're thinking about as well, too. So we're here. I'm here. I think that's my final rambling monologue.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for your long time passion and dedication for being a coach. That is much appreciated, and thank you for all that work.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to close up our Q&A here. What we would like to do is we just talked a bunch about what kinds of outreach need to happen with City Council, and just encourage folks to go to our website, philaparks.org. And there we have the rest of the activities that are going on today. We also have a sign-on letter for rec advisory councils, friends of groups, sports clubs and teams, any organization, club, group that touches on Parks and Rec. We would love to have you sign on to our letter, which we're going to deliver on the day of testimony. And so that is on May 26th. And I think we opened that up. We're launching that today. We already have almost 20 groups signed on to that. But there are 300 or so parks and rec center sites across the network. So we want to try and get as many of those sites represented as we can as we're talking to City Council.
Yeah, this was a great and exciting conversation. We're so grateful for our City Council members for joining us. We're also going to continue this conversation going at 2 o'clock today. Please come back if you have time, and also invite friends and come with questions as well. Yeah, I think, the next session is at 2 o'clock, right? Yep, 2 o'clock.
Yeah, 2 o'clock. And then, perhaps some of the things that you'll learn in the course of these conversations you'll be able to use at our quiz night tonight at 7. So.
Yes, that will be fun.
All right, Lula, look forward to seeing you in an hour.
Yes, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your awesome questions that you have been submitting. And if we didn't answer it, we'll transfer it to our 2 o'clock discussion as well. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock.